An in-depth look at the people and events that shape our community. This is Iowa in Focus.
This week, Donald Trump rolls out a new tax plan. We look at the numbers to see if they make sense. We're joined by two Republicans who have taken different paths to the 2016 race. The details that make them say they're destined for the White House. Welcome to Iowa in Focus. Every week we'll be right here giving you the context behind what you're seeing happening on the campaign trail with the presidential candidates and in the news. And we start that process today with the Barnstorm, in a campaign where the Republican frontrunner has been criticized. Okay.
An in-depth look at the people and events that shape our community. This is Iowa in Focus.
This week, Donald Trump rolls out a new tax plan. We look at the numbers to see if they make sense. We're joined by two Republicans who have taken different paths to the 2016 race. The details that make them say they're destined for the White House. Welcome to Iowa in Focus. Every week we'll be right here giving you the context behind what you see happening with presidential candidates out on the campaign trail and in the news. And we start that process with the Barnstorm. In a campaign season where the Republican frontrunner has been criticized for being light on details, Donald Trump released his new tax plan, and this time it's the details that are the fun part. Some of the highlights: any person who makes less than $25,000 or a couple that makes less than $50,000 would pay no federal income taxes. 7 tax brackets would be reduced down to 4, with the biggest one being at only 25% instead of the roughly 40% that it sits at right now. And corporations would be able to bring money back into the U.S. from overseas at a deeply discounted tax rate.
It'll simplify the tax code. It'll grow the American economy at a level that it hasn't seen for decades.
On top of all that, Trump says that the plan will not add to the national debt or deficit. Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, a bill to fund the government was almost in danger because it also funded Planned Parenthood. Congress did avoid a shutdown, but not before Planned Parenthood's president, Cecile Richards, answered questions from Republican lawmakers Tuesday about why her organization should get its federal funding. The group came under fire after secretly recorded videos appeared to show Planned Parenthood workers breaking rules so that the organization would profit from selling fetal tissue.
The federal funding that Planned Parenthood receives allows our doctors and clinicians at our health centers to provide birth control, cancer screenings, and testing and treatment for sexually transmitted infection.
While Richard spoke with lawmakers in D.C., that issue is making waves in Iowa's 1st District. The GOP called on 2 people hoping to become the Democratic pick to run for the 1st District House seat to give their money back to Planned Parenthood because it had ties to the organization. They say Monica Vernon and Pat Murphy got thousands of dollars in campaign donations from that organization. Vernon had received nearly $6,000 from the current and former president of Planned Parenthood of the Heartland. That's the branch that works right here in eastern Iowa. Vernon says she's proud to have the support of those Planned Parenthood leaders, and the money is not going to be given back. While all that was going on, presidential candidates are still coming through Iowa. New Jersey Governor Chris Christie was in the central part of the state picking up 6 major endorsements from big money donors. He says it's all part of a plan that's going to make him a force to be reckoned with in Iowa.
I will be here, and I'll be here frequently, and I'll be in every important part of this state. So by the time you get to February, you people will be tired of seeing me.
Other candidates have been through the state a little bit more than Christie. Some of our political experts say that Christie might be best served by making a stand in New Hampshire, closer to home in New Jersey, where more voters might know him there. Fellow Governor John Kasich from Ohio started in Davenport, then landed in Cedar Rapids on Thursday. He started hot after jumping into the fray right before the first Republican debate in his home state. Since then, he struggled with barely more than 2% support in most polls. He says fellow Midwestern Governor Scott Walker dropping out doesn't change how much he pays attention to Iowa at all.
My job is to let people know who I am. Town hall meetings, Chamber of Commerce speeches, house parties, and look, either people like you or they don't. If they like you, that's great, they'll reward you. If they don't like you, I'll cry for a few minutes, but I'll be okay.
Coming up later in the show, I sit down one-on-one with John Kasich to talk much more about how he might stand out in this 2016 cycle. Florida Senator Marco Rubio is taking a page out of Chris Christie's playbook and pledging more attention to Iowa, except he's also backing it up now with his checkbook. Rubio has been mostly fundraising to this point, but now he's planning on spending more money in Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina, mostly in television ads. Dr. Ben Carson rounded out the week with his visits to central Iowa. He was in Des Moines, then had a medical town hall in Ankeny. He keeps getting closer to Donald Trump in the polls. NBC and the Wall Street Journal have him at just 1 percentage point behind Trump's 21%. That's virtually a dead heat. Now, to walk us through Donald Trump's tax plan and what we can expect to see from the Marco Rubio blitz in the early voting states, it's time to go back to school and take our class notes. We're taking class notes now with Bruce Nesmith at Coe College here in Cedar Rapids. So, Professor Nesmith, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
We could start with the Trump tax plan. So this was something that he rolled out earlier this week and has some kind of interesting bullet points. The first one kind of being that there would be no federal taxes for individuals who make less than $25,000 a year and for couples that make less than $50,000 a year. Is that something that do the numbers make sense there? Can you crunch the numbers in a way that work?
Well, it depends on what you mean by work. I think for one, I know that there's considerable restiveness about how much taxes people pay, and there was a talk a couple of years ago about this $1 a day tax plan, where at minimum everybody would kick in $365 a year. So I'm not sure to what extent there's demand out there for people to cut lower income people out of the income tax thing altogether. And I'm not sure how much difference it would make to the federal treasury to cut taxes on lower income people. It might, it would certainly help people who are living on the margins to have a little more room.
Are these things that will move the needle, or are they just good talking points on the campaign trail?
I think for the most part, they're good talking points. It's hard to see exactly where Trump is going with this because it's not consistent with what he was saying earlier in the summer. He was talking about people of higher incomes not paying enough tax and hedge fund managers and things like that. So it's not clear whether this is his final answer. He's converted to a different approach, or whether this is a transition to something else.
We're seeing in the Rubio campaign that they've built up a little bit of a war chest for them. They're within the top 5 or in the top 5 discussion in most national polls and here in Iowa too. Now it seems like they're going to kind of turn the table and start to spend a lot of that money in the early states like Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina. What kind of effect or change, if any, do you think we'll see from the Rubio campaign now?
Well, if I knew that, I'd be rich and selling my expertise to campaigns. I think what they'd like to see is increased visibility for the senator who has not been as prominent in Iowa as a number of his rivals have been. But there's no guarantee. Spending money doesn't necessarily result in increased poll numbers, which is really what he's after.
A lot of people have been saying that he's been a little bit light on personality. Can you spend enough money to get to overcome that, or is it going to be a two-pronged approach? Maybe more money and more commercials and more events, but then also you have to shift the campaign a little bit and maybe even shift the candidate.
Well, if you think about advertising, which this really is, a lot of what commercial advertising does is to create a personality for the product. So I think that there's the potential of success of sort of creating a personality. Maybe you're not wonderful in a given speech, but if you have enough personality built up in terms of media presence, then that could overcome that.
You can find that full interview up online as well. Now, every week we'll be going inside Iowa politics, talking about the candidates not trying to move into the White House. This week, Governor Terry Branstad signed an executive order on a playground in Cedar Rapids. He's creating an office at the University of Northern Iowa to train schools to deal with bullying and set up anti-bullying policies. It all came after Cedar Rapids student Isaac Taylor decided he wanted to help kids who were being bullied or even just needed an extra friend all over the city of Five Seasons.
And by having students like Isaac Taylor step forward and do things like this buddy bench, those things all help in make it clear that bullying is not acceptable, and we're going to do everything we can to stop it, stamp it out in Iowa.
That new office will work on developing a 24-hour hotline for kids who feel threatened, and will also figure out a procedure for notifying parents of kids who are bullied and the kids who are bothering them too. Coming up next on Iowa in Focus, two Republicans who rocked the field sit down for one-on-one interviews. Find out what surprised Carly Fiorina about her own campaign and what John Kasich says he needs to do to survive until his home state's primary. Welcome back to Iowa in Focus. This week we're joined with Republican presidential candidate Carly Fiorina. Carly, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
No problem at all. First off, you guys launched your campaign about 4 months ago in the beginning of May.
It feels like a long time ago.
Right. But more recently is when your numbers in the polls have kind of taken off and your name recognition has kind of gone through the roof. Why do you think it took so long, and were you expecting for it to be that much of a delay? Or?
Actually, I was expecting it to take longer, if you want to know the truth. And the reason for that is when we launched in May, very few people knew who I was. They never heard my name. They didn't know I was running for president. It takes a long time to introduce yourself to people. So I spent a lot of time here in Iowa and other early primary states, a lot of time talking with people either on television or on the radio. And then, of course, the first debate happened on Fox News. And at that point, less than 40% of the voters had ever heard my name. So that was an introduction. And then at the CNN debate, half the people had never heard my name. Another introduction. And I think what the polls show is that when people get to know me and they hear me and see me and most importantly understand what I will do as president, they tend to support me.
When we've spoken before, it seemed like you kind of downplayed the idea of being a female candidate in the Republican race, saying that every issue is a women's issue because women make up 53% of the population.
All true.
Yeah, exactly. But now, though, Donald Trump has come out and said things against Megyn Kelly, against women in general. He spoke about you specifically. Is it more important now to be the strong female candidate in the race because you have a figure like Donald Trump saying some of the things that he's saying? Is that a flag that you're more willing to pick up now, or that needs to be picked up in the first place?
I want people to support me, to vote for me, because I am the most qualified candidate to win this job and to do this job. I also am a woman. I think I'm a pretty strong woman. And I don't think Donald Trump got the better of me, and I don't think he got the better of those other women as well. And so I think women and men want to see, who are you? What are you made of? Whether someone is a man or a woman, I think people are going to vote for who they believe is most qualified and who has the character and the courage and the resolve to do what needs to be done. I think the reason I'm rising in the polls is people are concluding this woman, Carly Fiorina, can do those things.
We're also joined this week on Iowa in Focus with Ohio Governor John Kasich. Governor Kasich, thanks for joining us.
Kevin, thank you.
If we could start first with, in the 2016 campaign, we've seen a lot from Donald Trump and a lot of the outsiders. You seem to be kind of a different candidate, that you've been in government for a while, you've been a governor, you're not Donald Trump in that sense. You're not kind of big and flamboyant. Exactly. Yeah. How is that an advantage in 2016, which has been a race that, unlike we've seen before?
Well, I think we've seen lots of races like this. I don't think this is that unusual. Look, I've been a reformer all of my lifetime. You don't balance the federal budget without being a reformer. I was one of the chief architects. I was involved in dramatic reform of the Pentagon. I was involved in welfare reform. And then when I became governor of Ohio, Ohio was basically dying. I had to shake that whole system up. So all of my career, I've kind of worked against the status quo to bring about change and innovation, but I also know how to get things done.
You've run before, back in 2000. What went wrong back then?
I was too young and didn't have the resources. No different. I mean, I had a lot of fun out here, and a lot of people said, we like you, but come back when you got more that you've done. And so You know, back then it was, I wasn't ready to be president, really. I mean, people said, good guy, but not this time. That's okay, I lived with it.
I guess what over the last 15 years then made you decide that this was the time to seriously jump in?
Well, I am governor of Ohio, you know, and no Republican has ever won the presidency without being able to win Ohio, and I have significant accomplishments there, plus 10 years of experience in the private sector, so I haven't spent all my time in government. But it's all about results, it's about growth, maturity, and it's about success. I mean, when you think about it, Ohio was $8 billion in the hole. We now have a $2 billion surplus. We've cut taxes by more, almost $5 billion, more than any sitting governor in the country. Our credit is rock solid, and we're helping everybody to have a chance to get up and live out their God-given purpose.
Not that you race against any specific Republican, especially in a field of what was 16, but when Governor Walker dropped out, he was kind of the other Midwestern governor in the race. How does that change your approach to Iowa now?
It doesn't.
No?
No. I mean, you know, I don't do things on the basis of sort of segments and who are my voters. My job is to let people know who I am. Town hall meetings, Chamber of Commerce speeches, house parties, and look, either people like you or they don't. If they like you, that's great, they'll reward you. If they don't like you, I'll cry for a few minutes, but I'll be okay.
Coming up next on Iowa in Focus, lots of people say they don't like super PACs. We'll lay out how those super PACs actually came to be exactly what they are today. Welcome back. This is what we call the real story, giving context to some of the events that go on during the 2016 race for the White House. Sometimes we'll have to go back a few weeks, months, or even years to set the stage. And today we tackle super PACs. This all starts with a movie that was made back in 2008. It was a nonprofit corporation that was named Citizens United. They produced a 90-minute documentary called Hillary the Movie, criticizing Hillary Clinton. That challenged an existing rule that prevented corporations from spending its money in what's called electioneering communications within a certain window before a primary or a general election. Citizens United challenged those rules. 2 years later, in 2010, a Supreme Court ruling opened the door for super PACs as we know them today. The court ruled that spending money on a political cause is a part of free speech, so it's protected under the First Amendment. They basically said that a super PAC supporting their cause or a candidate is no different than any individual person, you or me, walking around telling as many people as possible about the candidate that they support or the issue that they think is important. The difference is that the super PAC is using an unlimited amount of money to do it. The court says limiting the amount of money they can spend would be limiting their ability to spread their message. Since there are limits to the amount of money that can be given directly to a candidate's campaign, super PACs open the door for people or corporations to spend as much money as they wanted to. That caught Stephen Colbert's attention when he was hosting his show on Comedy Central. During the 2012 cycle, he created his own super PAC. He called it Stephen Colbert's Colbert Super PAC, Making a Better Tomorrow, tomorrow.
Mr. Colbert, you may form your PAC and proceed as the commission has advised in this opinion.
Woo! I can have super PAC!
It was a joke, but it made people pay attention. Right now, the super PACs work as independent groups that can spend as much money as they want, however they want to spend it. A lot of PACs will spend it on ads for a candidate or against a candidate's opponents. It serves an important purpose because it lets the candidate say that they're not responsible for what's being put on TV by the super PAC, especially when it's nasty, but still helps their cause. Or they can spend money in a way like Believe Again does. That's a super PAC that supports Bobby Jindal in this election. They're hosting 53 town hall meetings for Jindal to speak at all throughout the Iowa caucus, allowing the campaign to spend time and resources elsewhere.
I think that the notion that individuals have an unlimited right to engage in free speech is settled law, and the only way super PACs might cease to exist is if you get rid of the limits on giving directly to candidates.
The catch now is that many of the PACs are run by people close to the candidates or who used to be. The idea is that even if they aren't allowed to coordinate with the campaigns, which is one of the most basic rules of super PACs, that it doesn't mean like there isn't some kind of master plan created in the months before the campaign starts, laying out how the super PAC can be most effective. The super PACs looking to have an impact in 2016 have been working on this for months now. We went to opensecrets.org. That's a website that's run by a research group tracking money in politics to see how much some of the super PACs have raised so far. This is what we found. Jeb Bush's super PAC, the Right to Rise USA, leads the way with more than $103 million so far. They've only spent about $4 million. Scott Walker's super PAC, Unintimidated PAC, has $20 million. And since 2 weeks ago, all they don't have, is a candidate to spend it on. Conservative Solutions PAC, that's for Marco Rubio, has about $16 million and hasn't spent any of it so far. With Rubio looking to up his game in Iowa, we'll keep an eye out to see if they do as well. And the leading Democratic PAC is Hillary Clinton's Priorities USA Action. They have about $15 million. Again, keep in mind, the candidates cannot coordinate directly with these PACs. The groups just openly support certain candidates. You can find a full list of how much all of these PACs have and who they support at opensecrets.org. Coming up next, weighing in on social media, we take a look at your thoughts about the chance that Iowa might not be first in the nation eventually. Welcome back. We'll close the show each week taking a look at what's going on social media. And Iowans thought they were done with this, but RNC Chairman Reince Priebus scared some people this week. He said that Iowa and New Hampshire are not sacred cows for the nominating process. That means he's opening the door to some kind of potentially rotating system where the first in the nation title that Iowa is generally so proud of actually rotates between a few different states. We posted that story to our Facebook wall, and here's what some of you guys thought about it. Greg says, I think it should be on a full cycle. That way other states get a chance to be annoyed by the political powers for 2 years before they're even relevant too. And Deb says, if Iowa were not to be the first, I doubt a candidate would even remember where Iowa is. Some interesting points of view. Now we take a check of their voice. That's what the candidates and their campaigns are posting on social media too. On the lighter side this week, Carly Fiorina posted a picture with Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley. She said, enjoyed spending some time with Chuck Grassley yesterday in Arlington, Iowa. Not a deer in sight. Hashtag IA caucus. Hashtag Carly 2016. I'm pretty sure what she's talking about with that deer is Chuck Grassley's famous tweet from October of 2012. That's where he said, Fred and I hit a deer on Highway 136 south of Dyersville. After I pulled fender, rubbing on tire, we continued to farm. Assumed deer dead. This is a legendary tweet because of assumed deer dead at the end. If you don't already know, Chuck Grassley is one of the handful of politicians who operates his own Twitter account. It's a pretty funny follow if you don't watch it already. And before Ohio Governor John Kasich visited Iowa, he was in Chicago and tweeted this picture. He stopped by Portillo's hot dog shop in Chicago, no ketchup, Chicago style, and then he signed it John. In case you were wondering, he is pro hot dog. You can follow along on Twitter and Facebook all week long, see our interviews as we do them, chime in with what you think, and send us your favorite pictures from the events that you go to during the week. And now looking ahead to the week and some of the events, Jeb Bush is in Bettendorf and West Des Moines. You can take a look at those there. Have a good time, and thanks for watching Iowa in Focus this week.